Hobbes starts to make some moves which are going to really categorize most of political philosophy within that liberal tradition, at least in that kind of early modern era. So there's this broader shift that occurs in this discussion in Thomas Hobbes away from the kinds of considerations that tended to dominate political discussions in the preceding world in the West. And so things like historical context, or really historical inheritance. Questions of, well, like, what has the government been? What are our rights? What are our traditions? What are the bodies that currently exist that have been handed to us that are governing? Questions about, legitimacy of a particular monarchy or noble family or something like that. Those questions tend to focus on history and inheritance. There is a shift in the modern world away from history in terms of what's been received toward theory. Second thing, we have a move away from questions of this common good, or this idea that there is this broader conception of what the good is, or that there is a good that is transcendent, meaning that there is a good that is beyond the physical world, toward which the physical world points, and in view of which the physical order should be properly constructed and ordered and directed. And we see a move away from divine revelation as giving us a conception of the state. So divine revelation, whether that is through just biblical, scriptural considerations and debates, or revelation in the Roman sense of tradition that's been handed down by the magisterium. This is really a move away from those considerations as being primary to then more general rational questions. What theoretically is the state, and then how do we implement that? So we have a kind of abstractifying of the political questions, and abstractifying of questions of meaning or purpose is found in the state without so many historical or cultural or theological consideration. And so this kind of theoretical way of approaching government starts with this theoretical state of nature. The state of nature is a time before the government existed. So it's a question of what would human society look like without the government? And so political philosophy then, in this view, arises from a consideration of what is human nature apart from the government, and then a consideration of, if that's how human nature is apart from the government, how does the government then interact with that or direct that in a proper way? And so now you're really in the realm of abstraction and theory. So Hobbes asks this question of, well, what would man be like apart from the state? Or it seems to me that he's saying, what was man like apart from the state? I think he really is constructing this real historical imagined time period where there is no government at all. And you could theoretically have a state of like pure bliss, that these human institutions just corrupt this kind of pure state that didn't have any law or anything like that. You see that kind of idealization in Rousseau of human nature and decrying of human institutions. Hobbes does not do that. He kind of does the opposite. And so for Hobbes, the state of nature, the state of man without a government, without law restraining him, is just complete chaos. And that chaos largely arises from conflict over things. Who owns what? And so you've got a limited number of resources, and people need those resources. Then people are naturally going to, in order to preserve their own lives, they're going to try to get those resources. And because they are limited by nature, they're going to be competing with other people in order to get those resources. And so what you have is then conflict. So conflict largely arises over wanting things or competing over things. So questions of who owns what. And the way that Hobbes sees humanity and sees the human psyche is that we are inherently self-interested. We naturally are selfish. We naturally are concerned solely with what we want and not what would benefit anybody else. And so that is going to drive our actions. And so if there is a threat to our bodies or what might be good for us, we are going to basically do anything in our power in order to stop that threat, including acts of violence toward other people. Hobbes describes this state of nature very famously as poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Another phrase that's often cited here that Hobbes uses is that the state of nature is all against all. Everybody is against everybody because we all want the same things. We're all fighting for the same resources, and there are just no boundaries at all. and we are all just going to try to destroy one another. And so this state of self-interested conflict then means that in the state of nature, there can be no industry, there is no human creativity, there is no art, there is no culture, there are no institutions. And so naturally, because we are so selfish, we are not going to cooperate with other people in order to accomplish anything at all. It is only in the existence of the state and under the magistrate that such things are possible. And this gets to just general questions about human nature. So you might hear this and think, well, all of that kind of sounds similar, say, to the Christian doctrine of original sin. This perception within Christian theology that we believe that human beings are fallen. Human beings, by nature, because of the sin of Adam, are selfish. St. Augustine uses the phrase that we are incurvatus se. We are curved in on ourselves. We look for our own needs, our own desires, our own wants, rather than those of other people around us. And so, we may say, well, Hobbes just kind of sounds like he's in that general Augustinian Western theological tradition, just like most Christians at this time in the Western world would be as well. But he is not just saying that. He is saying something more than that. And so he differs from the Christian conception of original sin in a couple ways. And I would say that in some way he's more pessimistic than Christians are about even the effects of the fall. But in some ways he's also much more optimistic. So what the heck do I mean by that? Well, the place where I think he is a bit more pessimistic is that he sees humanity and human beings as primarily individuals. And so he's not thinking of humans as being inherently interconnected by nature, such that human community exists because that's just the way in which humans function. That's part of how humans are created. And so we have to work communally to some degree. We have to work in collaboration and cooperation with other people. That's just inherent to who we are. For Hobbes, that's not really natural to human people at all. He would instead say that any kind of cooperative system at all has to be kind of imposed rather than something that comes from the ground up that's inherent to humanity. So without this imposition from the state of creating this any kind of peace, we are not going to live in community with other people in any way. And this is part of a broader shift you see. A lot of Enlightenment thought is that there is this centralizing of the individual will. And for Hobbes, the will or free actions of the individual really become definitional to what personhood is. And so the human person is, definitionally one who has a will. The human is definitionally one who is free. And it's for this reason that you have this competitive vision that lies at the heart of what humanity is, because we as people are defined primarily as these individual free wills who come into conflict with other individual free wills, which then creates this division. And it's largely because of this division of people and view of people as wills that for Hobbes, the common good is not really a possibility, because there is no possibility of these distinctive free, self-willing things coming together really for some common good or purpose. So in some ways, he never really sees that we can even get out of that selfish mode. It's not like he is speaking about, sin and redemption or something, where you can get out of that kind of selfish mode. He just says this is just kind of the way people are. This is the way that they operate. And so if you view people as these primarily self-interested, self-centered individuals who are defined largely by their own willing, that's going to have an impact on how you view society in terms of how you view all sorts of things, but society being the topic under discussion here. So people are inherently selfish largely due to this inner impulse to preserve our lives. And so as a human person, of course, I want my life to extend. Of course, I don't want to die. When there are dangers to my life physically, I will do what I can to fend off those dangers. These are just natural human instincts and impulses. And this then is what creates selfishness. Because my selfishness really arises out of what is my primary desire and that great inner psychological impulse to preserve my bodily life. And then here is where he's actually pretty optimistic about human nature in some other ways. which is, he says, well, if life is preserved, then people are generally not that selfish and will kind of leave each other alone. Now, to be clear, when he says not that selfish, what he's not saying is then we're just caring and loving toward other people. He's not really talking about that, but it's more this idea of leaving each other alone, as if, like, kind of, if you don't threaten me, I won't threaten you. So if you're not a danger to me, I have no reason to dislike you or attack you. It's not because there's some kind of genuine goodness within a person that they actually want to just live in some kind of community of self-giving for the sake of another person. We live with other people, or we collaborate with other people. We operate within the realm of other people, but we ultimately do that for, selfish reasons. And we're going to leave other people alone just because we don't see them threatening us, and there's no reason not to leave them alone. He's also optimistic in his view of emotion, or the passions, really, which isn't identical with emotion. But so within classical philosophy and within then traditional Christian theology, it is argued that reason is superior to the passions. So the idea is that we have these inner desires, passions, things that we just kind of want. And that could be emotions, but it could be, things like the desire for bodily needs as well. So we could talk about things like, hunger. And for classical philosophy and again Christian theology, there is this directing nature of reason, so that reason governs the passions. And so that properly ordered life is one in which you don't just simply give in to whatever you feel. And so you don't just say, well, I'm really hungry, so I'm just going to, eat 3 pizzas because I feel like it. Instead, you're going to use your reason to say, okay, I am hungry, but then you use your reason to say, is it a good idea to, eat 3 pizzas? Would that benefit me? And then you use your reason to come to the conclusion that probably would not be the best thing to do. So maybe you will eat less pizza, or perhaps you will order something else or make something else that is healthier for you, whatever it might be. It is the view of classical philosophy in general that emotion or bodily desires, impulses, those kinds of things are not generally very reliable guides at all. And we cannot rely on them and should not rely on them in terms of our decision making. But we need to think through things before we do them. And so Hobbes challenges that. And that's something that is going to be challenged by a number of the post-structuralist thinkers like Derrida and Foucault much later on.